Welcome back, everybody. Football season is right around the corner, as you all know. It might even be week one by the time you see this video. But I'm here to talk about Bryce Young today. His performance from last year left me with some questions coming into this year. Positive questions, of course. If Bryce Young's career pretty much just ended after he got benched a few weeks into the season last year, I wouldn't have any questions. But it's a good thing that I do have some questions about Bryce Young coming into this season after what was a disastrous first 18 games of his career. Not all his fault. Of course, the Frank Reich experiment in Carolina went south very quickly, and he struggled to start last year. He got benched. He got reinserted in the starting lineup after Andy Dalton got into a car accident, and that's not the only part of the story. Bryce Young did produce in those games that he came back in and earned that starting role. You can see the numbers now, the drastic difference between his first 18 games and the second half of last year where he looked like a competent NFL quarterback. But is that enough? Is that half a season of being a competent NFL quarterback enough for me to say this guy is the future? Panthers fans might think so, and I personally was on the fence about it, and then I went and looked through his film, and that's what we're going to be here to talk about today. Now, when you dig into those first few games when he came back from his benching, it's certainly better. It is much better than what you saw for the first portion of his career, but I still have a lot of questions when I'm looking at him. I see a guy who isn't really a great athlete, and I'm not talking about his height and weight here and all that stuff that people threw around in the draft process. I'm talking about his explosiveness, how twitchy he is, because when he tries to take off to run sometimes, you see him getting caught. You see him unable to escape certain situations in the pocket that the elite guys are able to get out of, like this play here against the Chiefs. It's also no secret that Bryce Young doesn't have a cannon for an arm. And that's fine. You don't need to have a big arm to be a good and successful NFL quarterback, but it does show up. It does limit some of his ceiling, in my opinion, and you can really see it on plays like this one. This one kind of just looks like an overthrow, but what I saw was that the ball really hung up in the air and that he didn't really deliver this ball on enough of a line for Adam Thielen to have a shot at it. And because it hung up in the air so long due to what I perceived as a lack of arm strength, that gave the safety a chance to come over and make the play on this ball. But just getting that out of the way early, there's a reason why Bryce Young reclaimed the starting role after these few games, and it's mostly because he produced. But there were some things on tape that were very encouraging if you're a fan of Bryce Young. One of them is, for a smaller quarterback, he's really, really good at throwing in breakers. And that's one very specific thing to hang your hat on, but it's indicative of a bigger thing with Bryce Young. He sees the field and he understands the game very well. He wins with his mind. He sees things a step earlier than everybody else. And he also, for a young quarterback, is really, really good at the smaller things like diagnosing blitzes. So different quarterbacks have different responsibilities when it comes to diagnosing blitzes. Some offenses build hots into the offense, so the quarterback doesn't really have to think, but he also doesn't really change the protections at all. He just has to throw it hot behind the blitz whenever he gets heated up. And that can work, and it does work for a lot of guys, but it's not foolproof. A lot of veteran quarterbacks and a lot of quarterbacks from an era or two ago like to just be able to see everything pre-snap and have kind of a menu of options to change the protection. Bryce Young is kind of like that in a way, and I think it took Dave Canales about till midway through the season last year to understand that. So Canales started to open things up a little bit, not in the we're going to throw 50 times a game way, but we're going to spread things out pre-snap and let Bryce Young diagnose what he sees in front of him and make those changes himself. It's not very common for a young quarterback to diagnose a Steve Spagnuolo blitz the way Bryce Young does here. The most impressive part of this play specifically to me isn't the fact that he identified the Chiefs were blitzing. It's not exactly a mystery what they were doing on this play based off of the demeanor of the second level defenders. What's the most impressive to me is the answer that Bryce actually gets to based off of the pre-snap look. He looks at the outside corners, and just based off of their demeanor alone, he can tell that this is a man coverage blitz. And because this is a man coverage blitz, Bryce Young identifies that on this flood concept that the Panthers are running, the corner route from David Moore is going to be his best option, considering the man that is matched up with him is the deep high safety, who is a couple of yards inside of him leverage wise. And so instead of just throwing hot, Bryce Young knows that if he buys enough time, and he does that with his fast drop back here, he can just throw this corner route into open space and there's not going to be anybody there to cover it. And that's exactly what he does on this play. And given all of this stuff, even though during these games the pocket movement was a little sporadic and his feet got kind of weird at times, I thought Bryce Young was handling pressure really well, which was a pretty stark contrast from earlier on in his career when it looked like the pocket was eating him alive most of the time. So I was impressed. And then I saw the Cowboys game. This one was a tough watch. It once again looked like the pocket was kind of eating Bryce Young alive. And I want to start by saying it wasn't all his fault. This game got out of hand pretty early on, and the offensive line really did him no favors. But that creation ability that he kind of flashed in the previous games that got him drafted first overall coming out of Alabama, he got stuck in that mode far too often this game. Once again, they were down by a ton this game. There's no reason for him to try and just, move the team down the field 5 yards at a time when you're losing by 15 in the second half. I get it. But I was a little bit worried. I was a little bit worried that he was holding on to the ball too long and he was taking far too many negative plays this game. So once again, while it's not completely his fault, I had a bit of a sour taste in my mouth leaving this Cowboys game. And while the next few games were certainly better, I still could not get that game out of my head. It worried me so much because that was a good pass rush, that was a good defense, and it just looked like it ate him alive. It reminded me of what he looked like early in his career, and that scares me. When you don't win with huge athletic gifts, you need to be able to avoid taking negative plays, and it just really worried me that Bryce Young didn't seem to be able to avoid the negative plays in that game. But there was a final game against the Atlanta Falcons, and I should say that that was probably the worst pass rush in the league last year. However, that game moved me a lot from Bryce Young. I think throughout these couple of games, I was looking for a superpower that could really lift the ceiling on what Bryce Young could be. Because I've seen him be an average NFL quarterback now. I know he could be QB 20, but I was looking for something more. I was looking for a justification for whatever contract the Panthers are going to want to give him at the end of this season, and I finally saw it. I saw what his superpower is. It's the superpower he showed at Alabama, and it's now a superpower that he is showing in the NFL. Anticipation. Bryce Young sees things at a speed that very few guys do. Even in the NFL, Bryce Young sees things before they are going to happen sometimes, and it is so impressive to watch when everything is clicking. If you look at this play, you could be led to believe that Bryce Young made the wrong read and kind of just got lucky that AJ Terrell played Adam Thielen once the ball was in the air instead of the whole shot that Bryce Young was throwing to Jatavian Sanders. But that's not what happened. What happened was AJ Terrell came forward early on in the play, and Bryce Young immediately identified that the Falcons were running cover 2 and that AJ Terrell was a cloud corner. And so even though he was running even with Jatavian Sanders, Bryce Young confidently lets this thing rip, knowing that AJ Terrell is keying on Adam Thielen instead of this wheel route that he's going to throw. Does it look like he got away with something? Yeah, a little bit, but even if he was wrong, this ball is in a perfect location for Jatavian Sanders to get it in a place where AJ Terrell honestly doesn't have a chance, even if he didn't bite on the little flat from Thielen here. When you are not overly athletically gifted, you have to be able to win with your mind. You have to be a step ahead. And at least in this game, we got Alabama Bryce Young. We got the guy that was a full step ahead of everybody else on the field. The guy who was seeing things that coaches in the press box aren't even seeing. We got that guy. And if that guy can show up in 2025, the sky's the limit for him. So just to wrap things up, what does this all mean? Can he be that guy moving forward? I don't know. The Falcons' pass rush was terrible. That probably contributed to that performance. But it was very encouraging to see. Do I think that Bryce Young could be somewhere between the 10th and 15th best quarterback in the NFL? Absolutely. I would almost say that that's the most likely outcome. And if you have a full offseason to build the entire offense around him the way that Canales kind of started to do towards the end of last year, you get better weapons like Tetairoa McMillan, I think that that is a recipe for success, and I think that could be a justification for paying him. He looks like an ascending player, and his best years might still be out ahead of him. If he doesn't reach that height, why is it going to be? Probably because of the skittish pocket presence, and probably because of the lack of athletic gifts. However, I think Bryce Young is well on the path to overcoming that. He's done it against NFL talent now. An offseason to build confidence, an offseason to, like I said, build the offense around him. And I think you could see a very good quarterback next year. But what's the ceiling here? I know I've talked a lot about the athletic limitations of Bryce Young, but I feel like maybe I'm overstating them a little bit, and I don't really want to put a ceiling on him. There are guys who are at the top of the league like Joe Burrow who aren't freak athletes. Obviously, Joe Burrow is 6'4" and that 220 pounds, and that makes a difference maybe, but maybe it doesn't. I don't want to be the guy that says that Bryce Young can't become an elite quarterback. I wouldn't predict it, but I'm not going to rule it out. The guy has a superpower, and the guy doesn't really have any huge weaknesses like some other guys that are going to prevent them from getting them to the top of the league. I think that Bryce Young can be a solid quarterback in this league, and I don't want to be the guy that says he can't be more than that. I believe in him, and I'm rooting for him. And if you're a Panthers fan, I think you have every reason to go into the season being optimistic about your quarterback situation for the first time since Cam Newton's shoulder fell off. Sorry about that. Till next time.